You are an iron man or iron woman, except your iron is on your inside, not your outside. Your iron is critically important for muscle function, red blood cells, DNA synthesis, all sorts of positive things. So being too low is bad news and very common with younger women and people with gut issues. But being too high is also bad news because high iron can become oxidative and damage our bodies. So iron is a Goldilocks metal. You don't want it too hot, you don't want it too cold, you want it just right. So let's talk about all the nuance here relating to iron that most people either don't know, don't talk about, or don't understand. And I'm going to be critical of the carnivore diet here in some respects, and I'm also going to be critical of the vegan diet here. And based on comments I get, I know vegans are very emotional and sensitive with all that soy estrogen. So if you're a vegan, you may want to pass on this video and head over to Michael Greger's YouTube channel and learn how meat just probably causes cancer on the same level as DDT pesticides.
Whereas something like a burger just probably causes cancer, and people kind of like DDT. But what's the...
I spoke at a conference recently where Mike Greger was also speaking, by the way. So we occasionally cross paths, but the jab at meat, comparing it to DDT, is some total nonsense. And by the way, sidebar, when I do DNA consults for professional medical doctors, I always ask them what they think is the most corrupt field of medicine, and they virtually always say cardiology or oncology, which ironically are the two best funded fields in medicine, heart disease and cancer. And even more ironically, cardiology and oncology, those two corrupt fields, those are the two fields of medicine that keep trying to convince everyone that red meat is bad, even though our ancestors ate it for thousands of years. So, like some of the COVID vaccine is 96% effective nonsense, you can make scientific studies say anything you want if you have enough funding and institutional support and enough crappy epidemiology, but that doesn't mean any of it's true. Just be aware. So anyway, today we're going to talk about number one, how iron gets excreted from your body, which is something I'm betting you don't know because iron excretion is very unusual compared to most metals. We'll talk number two, about the types of iron in your body. Number three, how iron can be damaging to your body if it's too high or too low. Number four, we'll talk about the optimal levels for blood tests for each of the types of iron in your body. And number five, how to get your iron up or down with supplements and foods so you can achieve the optimal range for your health. So number one, how iron gets excreted from your body, how iron gets out of your body. It's really interesting. The first thing here you should know is you don't urinate out iron if it gets too high in your body. If you have too much mercury in your body, you piss it out. If you have excess zinc in your body or arsenic or whatever metal, you piss it out. This does not happen with iron. It's kind of crazy, right? There are two ways your body gets rid of iron. Number one, skin shedding, and number two, bleeding. Meaning if you have high iron in your body, it doesn't go down on its own. You basically need to bleed. If you're a premenopausal woman, you're all set here because you have a period. If you're a man, I don't care what the woke people have been telling you, you don't have a period, so you need to donate blood to get your high iron down if it's too high. And this is true for postmenopausal women with high iron also. So we'll talk about blood test details later. My main point here is skin shedding is too slow a process for getting iron overload under control. You need to donate blood. And if you're on drugs, they can discard the blood. They don't have to give it to somebody else. They can throw it in the sink. And it's also important to mention that quite often people have high iron because they drink too much booze, or more commonly, they eat too many carbs. So that's not a blood donation problem. That's a booze and high carb diet problem that you can fix. And you can't donate blood too often, or that's bad for a number of reasons. So eat healthy, don't booze, and we'll talk about blood tests in a minute. And just realize that you detox iron by bleeding. It's also possible to eliminate iron from your stools when it's bound to plant materials like fiber oxalates, phytic acid, and polyphenols. But people hear this and they misinterpret it. They think that plant materials pull high iron out of your body when you eat veggies, and it doesn't work that way. For example, phytic acid, also called phytate, lowers iron by making it less bioavailable in plants. In other words, when you eat plants, Even if the iron content looks high on a food label, the phytic acid makes it less accessible to our bodies when we eat the plants. Phytic acid isn't drawing iron out of our bodies, so it's not a replacement for blood donations if you have high iron. It's binding the iron. Polyphenols in plants also lower iron availability when you eat the plants, which is something most people don't know, mainly because of the way scientific journals publish gibberish, like there was an inverse correlation between the non-hydrolyzable polyphenol content and iron absorption. So it's no wonder polyphenols don't end up on people's radar as a food product that lowers iron. But polyphenols are a great way to block iron absorption in cases of hemochromatosis. We'll talk about that later. Besides phytic acid, which is exclusively found in plants, and polyphenols, which are exclusively found in plants, fiber, which is exclusively found in plants, also blocks iron absorption in humans by 51 to 74%. And this study was done using 12 grams of bran fiber, which is the outer shell of wheat and oats and the brown part of brown rice. And the fiber blocked iron absorption even after they removed phytates. So fiber adds the most iron-lowering potency to a diet rich in plants. In fact, when the ACS outlined a recommended daily intake in 2022, they say the daily intake of iron needs to be 10 to 15 mgs, since only 1 to 2 mgs are absorbed, because they keep recommending high fiber plant-based diets. So now they're messing with the RDAs under the assumption that you're going to eat a government-approved low-fat, low-meat diet with lots of fiber. And for the record, when the government starts recommending these low-fat, high-carb diets, that's when you see diseases of all types explode. So don't be fooled by appeal to authority arguments here. But anyway, they also mention in this review article that citric acid and ascorbic acid, vitamin C, increases iron uptake. So people sometimes assume these organic acids basically balance things out. I've seen vegans say this sort of thing on YouTube, and they're the ones with chronically low iron, so they need a straight answer on this more than anyone. The idea that vitamin C and citric acid allow your body to suddenly absorb plant-based food iron, it's whimsical at best, harmful at worst, because it's giving people a false sense of security when they have a terrible iron deficiency. For example, this study on enhancers of iron absorption found that you need an entire gram of citric acid added to your meal at minimum to get 3 milligrams of iron into your body from a plant-based fiber-rich foods. And they're talking about this in terms of fortifying foods with iron, which is a poor approach to diet for 1,000 different reasons. But we'll talk about supplements and foods later. That's number 5 on the list, and we're still on number 1. So you just got a little preview of number 5. But point number 1 is your body requires bleeding to eliminate excess iron if it's gotten to the point of excess. Now, point number 2 is about the types of iron in your body. Basically, what we're looking at when we do blood tests. Now, if I go to ownyourlabs.com, which is my favorite blood testing company, they offer the big 3 blood tests for iron: ferritin, transferrin, and then something called iron and TBC, which is technically a test of percent of saturation, serum iron, total iron binding capacity, and unsaturated iron binding capacity. That's a lot of stuff, but first let's talk about ferritin. If you only do one blood test for iron, I would recommend ferritin. It's the most important for most people by far, the exceptions being people with rare genetic issues or rare situations. And I'm not going to dive into every conceivable rare situation that people may have, but ferritin is great because it's more of a long-term snapshot of what's going on with iron stored in your body. For example, if you've been a vegan too long and your iron is depleted, it can take over a year to build it back up. And ferritin is a great way to check on that. We'll talk about the specific blood test numbers later. I don't want to jump ahead of myself here, but the serum iron can change dramatically day to day. So it's harder to know what's up if you only do a blood test once per year with things like serum iron. In fact, interesting side story here, when animals get infected with a bacteria or a parasite, they sequester iron. Our bodies literally hide the iron inside the cells in the form of ferritin. They say here this is done to limit pathogen acquisition of this essential nutrient, meaning our bodies can starve bacteria and parasites, and it's called nutritional immunity. And this nutritional hide and seek happens throughout the entire organism. This leads to parasites desperately sucking up heavy metals in place of iron, like this study shows, where parasites can accumulate heavy metals at concentrations orders of magnitude higher than those in the host tissues. And they've literally found some parasites with over 1,000 times higher heavy metal concentrations compared to the host, in case you thought this was just double or triple or just tenfold or something trivial like that. It's massive. This is why killing a parasite in your body can lead to a heavy metal dumping. But that's a different story for a different time. The point is, ferritin blows up during an infection because your body is hiding iron from pathogens. And ferritin, remember, is stored iron. Ultimately, inflammation from standard American hyper-processed, hyper-palatable foods can also trigger this same explosion of ferritin. And you can starve your own body of iron because it's all being shunted to the ferritin stores. So eat healthy and avoid chronic inflammation, which is not as easy as it sounds in our current profit-driven, hyper-palatable food pyramid system. My overall point here is check your ferritin. That's the best long-term snapshot of your current iron status. Checking your ferritin has the double benefit of indicating if you have some crazy infection or inflammation if the ferritin is super high. And just to be thorough here on the listing of types of iron in your body, I'll show them here. Ferritin reflects the stored iron, like I said. Serum iron is just the amount of iron just circulating around the blood, and it's usually bound to transferrin, which is the taxi service for iron. TIBC can show you your iron bioavailability, sort of like an SHBG test for sex hormones. Transferrin saturation and transferrin can also be checked, but now we're getting into the weeds a bit. When I do DNA consulting, some people have legit genetic issues with transferrin. The gene is abbreviated TF, like you see in this study, and especially the RS1799852 SNP, which can cause low transferrin, which leads to too much free iron or less iron available to your body, again, effectively starving out your own cells, but it's a fairly rare gene in the population. For example, in Utah, they find only 1.8% of people have this SNP. It's definitely more common in China at 5.8%, and Japan is similar, but it's basically not found in Africa, which is probably related to sickle cell anemia incidents. But that's a complicated story. My point is, if you have this gene, you should keep track of some of these more nuanced iron-related blood tests, besides just checking your ferritin. Otherwise, ferritin is excellent. And if you have the transferrin gene, which is relatively common in places like Bangladesh, vitamin A in the form of retinol is especially important. So I usually just tell people to focus on eating egg yolks. I don't care about the whites, just make sure you're getting the yolks because that's where all the retinol is. But again, it's not super common, so I don't want to get too far sidetracked. And just to remind myself where I'm at, that was point number 2 about the types of iron in our bodies. Let's move on to point number 3, how iron can be damaging to your body if it's too high or too low. And this is a fairly simple topic, thankfully, because we all know that iron oxidizes. Iron readily reacts with oxygen. Like if you have a steel pipe outside, it gets rusty. That's oxidation. The same thing can happen inside your body, which can be very damaging to your blood vessels, arteries, organs, your brain, everything really. It can make you feel tired, it can damage your joints, it can even mess with your hormone producing glands and alter your hormones. I could show you study after study after study, but let's just say this. High iron is oxidative and therefore damaging. So you don't want high iron. I'll define exactly what high means soon, but you don't want to be even a little too high. This is where I get concerned for people that eat carnivore diets sometimes. Not always, but some of them have crazy high ferritin, especially when they pound liver pills or eat lots of liver. I was eating lunch at a conference and I was speaking at once, and a person at the table was bragging about how they ate liver every day because it's a superfood. And I said, sounds a bit risky for your iron. And I asked them what their ferritin was, and they said, 800 or so, which is extremely toxic to your organs. And they even mentioned that their doctor had been concerned about this, but they had blown it off because they didn't trust doctors. They basically had diabetes of high iron, meaning it was an extreme situation, and they'd thrown the baby out with the bathwater in this one until I talked to them about it. But anyways, most people aren't genetically cut out to consume liver every day. So keep an eye out for high ferritin if you're doing this. So next, low ferritin, low iron. It's also extremely bad for your health because it's ultimately lowering your blood cells, including your white blood cells, your immune cells, but also and especially the red blood cells that carry oxygen all throughout your body. Having low iron negatively impacts the brain, especially developing brains. So you see long-term developmental outcomes in infants with iron deficiency, which again is common with a low meat, plant-heavy diet. And you'll see lower scores on tests of mental and motor functioning. And by the way, they've tracked kids over 10 years in studies, and they find similar results. So I'm just showing highlights, but there are a ton of studies here. Low iron in kids is almost as bad for their brain as fluoride in the drinking water, but it goes beyond children's brains. You see effects of low iron at all ages. For example, there's a special emphasis in medical research on iron deficiency causing cog impairment at older ages, geriatric patients. And then there's the fatigue. Nobody wants low energy all the time. And low iron triggers low energy. Even if you're technically non-anemic, meaning your iron isn't desperately low, but it's low enough to cause fatigue. There are a ton of studies, but this study specifically focuses on non-anemic menstruating women, again because women bleed out iron and men are usually too high, not too low if anything. But they found ferritin below 50 was linked to fatigue. So we're talking about specific ferritin numbers here. And let's just introduce bullet point number 4, the optimal levels for your blood test. Sadly, if you look at the normal range on a standard blood test, you'll find outrageous ranges, like this one says 20 to 380, which is more than a 10-fold range. It's like saying go jogging for 1 mile or 10 miles. That's a huge difference. And some blood tests say 30 to 300 or 20 to 400, things like that. Just nonsense. Hopefully as more people watch this video and all those copycat videos that are made based on this video, hopefully the lab companies upgrade these blood test ranges that are based on average Americans, because average Americans are just not healthy. Honestly, here's the truth. Your doctors are not trained to worry about your ferritin unless you're dying of low or high ferritin, because there's no prescription drugs to sell you that raise or lower your ferritin. Lowering or raising basically requires simple blood donations or eating more meat, so the medical system couldn't care less about your ferritin being optimized. But you should care because you don't want fatigue and brain dysfunction and poor muscle development and things like that. If they had a drug like a statin for ferritin, all you'd ever hear about is how bad ferritin is on your blood test, and they would tighten up that blood test range overnight. Oh, it's magic! But the drug would have side effects, and I would still be advocating for blood donations or eating more meat. Anyway, you need to be above 50, like I just showed, or you start feeling chronic fatigue and other health problems. On the high end of ferritin, there's more debate about what's optimal. In 1981, Jerome Sullivan from the University of South Florida College of Medicine proposed a new hypothesis in a medical journal. His hypothesis was that men have higher rates of heart disease because they tend to have more ferritin, more iron stored up in their bodies compared to women. Keep in mind, the best way to get rid of iron is bleeding, and premenopausal women bleed, while men don't. So Jerome Sullivan said, we observe 1, heart failure in iron storage diseases, and 2, accumulation of stored iron, ferritin, with age in men. And he makes an interesting point that heart diseases of affluence are rare among impoverished people who are often iron deficient. And for the record, fasting is excellent for your heart and excellent for reversing heart disease, but that's a loaded topic, so I'll save that for a different video. But Jerome Sullivan's iron hypothesis was vindicated 10 years after he proposed it in 1992. A study was published called High Stored Iron Levels Are Associated with Excess Risk of Myocardial Infarction, meaning heart attacks. And they conclude a high stored iron level as assessed by elevated serum ferritin is a risk factor for coronary heart disease. And they found specifically more than a double risk for acute heart attacks when ferritin was over 200. It was a 2.2-fold higher risk. And then your statin pushing cardiologist will ignore your ferritin even if it's over 300. Actually, they usually don't check your ferritin at all if you're a man, unless you've already had a heart attack or you have a more diligent doctor than most doctors. Remember, I've done over 3,000 DNA consults since 2010, and a lot of people send me their blood work in conjunction with their DNA file, so I see an incredible amount of blood tests from around the world, especially Americans. And speaking of DNA, the major risk gene for high iron is HFE. It's the HFE gene. That's the hemochromatosis gene. And hemochromatosis simply is a fancy way of saying you have iron overload. You have way too much iron. Your iron is so high, even the conventional medical doctors panicking over your number. That's hemochromatosis. Rather than talk about every gene variant on the HFE gene, I'll flash up some of the RS codes for people that do this for a living. It's worth mentioning for people that are not experts, a human gene typically contains 3,000 to 4,000 base pairs of DNA code letters. So you can have multiple mutations on the same gene. It's kind of like an essay. If you wrote an essay for school that was 3,000 or 4,000 characters, that's like 2 to 4 pages. You could have several misspelled words in that 4-page document, and those misspelled words are similar to human SNPs. That's what a SNP is, literally a single nucleotide polymorphism. It's not a large chunk of DNA that's missing or frame shifted. It's a single misspelled word in your school essay. Anyway, I personally think that the reason hemochromatosis gene SNPs exist is because those risk genes actually protect women from having too low a ferritin until menopause. Then after menopause, they are at a high risk problem, and men especially have damage from these high iron genes. So that's important for you to know. And these are not super rare genes. I talk to someone at least once per week that has a hemochromatosis gene. Also keep in mind that alcohol and inflammation from high blood sugar, or just inflammation in general, also raises ferritin, which is a mechanism for starving parasites, like I said. But it happens with generalized inflammation and high blood sugar. So hemochromatosis can be amplified by these things, which is even worse for health unless you donate blood and get the inflammation under control. And I usually recommend supplementing polyphenols or drinking black tea with meals when you have real problems with high ferritin hemochromatosis, because polyphenols block iron absorption and they have some health benefits. My favorite polyphenol is berberine. In case you wonder specifically. And in the interest of time, I'm going to show you a list of health problems that arise from too much iron in your body in case you want to do more research on any one of these. And a theme will be organ damage, starting with liver damage. Heart issues, which we've talked about with men versus women. Diabetes, not because of the blood sugar, but because of the damage to the pancreas, which is the organ that makes insulin. Joint pain, skin changes, endocrine or hormone disorders, especially related to the thyroid, which is your organ that makes thyroid hormones. Fatigue, which is ironic because low iron also causes fatigue. So you want that Goldilocks zone in the middle. Neurological issues, your brain and nervous system is always sensitive to high metals, including vaccine metals that are injected, by the way. Increased infection risk because of that parasite response we talked about earlier. And of course, organ failure in extreme situations. And like I said, most of these issues have to do with your organs. Now, it's obviously not hopeless if you have high ferritin. Donating blood usually cuts your ferritin approximately in half. So if you're 400, you donate blood, you'll be 200. Wait 6 months, donate again, you'll be optimized or very nearly optimized. And make sure you don't dip below 50. For the high end of the optimal range, there's much more debate than the low end. For example, ferritin specialist, whatever that means, William Ware, PhD, suggests we aim for 20 to 40 for women, which is insanely low based on feeling fatigue below 50. And William suggests 50 to 70 for men, which also seems silly because there are no studies linked here. It's just an appeal to authority. I'm a ferritin expert, so do what I say is what's going on here. If I go to actual scientific studies, I have a review here about the optimal serum ferritin level range, and they say we suggest the optimal ferritin levels range from 20 to 100, with transferrin levels 20 to 50%. And while I agree with the high end of 100, we don't want to damage your arteries, I think 20 is too low here. But these numbers are debatable and nuanced here because a professional athlete should be a little higher, probably around 150 on their ferritin, because they have a higher demand for iron and blood cells in general, especially endurance athletes. And younger kids have different needs and demands, so keep that in mind. But for most adults, and especially after age 40, I suggest 50 to 100 on ferritin, and I don't get too worked up if you're 50 to 150. And for full disclosure, there's quite a bit of debate about these numbers. For example, the World Health Organization, I say health in quotations because they have a shady history on a number of things, especially the COVID stuff. You can see it here in 2021 from the British Medical Journal, where the WHO announced in February of 2021 that the possibility that the virus had escaped from a lab needed no further investigation. And half of the team from the WHO that made this decision was made up of communist Chinese scientists, half of the team. And unfortunately, CNN
Tonight, brought to you by Pfizer.
In 2025, CNN is giving positive praise to the WHO, reaching a historic agreement to tackle future scamdemics because they did such a masterful job on the first one. And they created a legally binding pact to shore up the world's defenses against new pathogens, which basically is just a synonym for vaccine passports and more money for Pfizer and Bill Gates. And by the way, the WHO deleted their website page that pushed for the COVID-19 digital passports, and they've created a new page about global digital health certifications, passports, for digital public health infrastructure for developing a wide range of digital products for strengthening pandemic preparedness. So they've changed the words, but it's the same messaging. And don't forget about the 83 World Health Organization staff members who were implicated in child sex abuse in the Democratic Republic of Congo, possibly sex trafficking with girls as young as age 13, and how the internal report from the WHO downplayed this incident. All with majority funding from the US government, by the way. But anyway, the World Health Organization, who we should definitely take seriously because they're amazing, they recommend ferritin up to 150 in women and up to 200 in men. And they say in non-healthy individuals, you don't want to see ferritin over 500. So my point is, there's a lot of conflicting information on this general topic of optimal numbers. But you're watching this video because you presumably want my opinion on this, and my opinion is that we should never send another dollar to the WHO, and ferritin should be between 50 to 100 for most men and women alike. Now I want to change gears here and talk about how to fix low iron. I've already mentioned how plants make it difficult to absorb iron. So first things first, eat loads of red meat and liver, or supplement liver every day if your ferritin is low. It still may take a year or more to get your stored iron back up to optimal levels, but that's how you do it. It's simple: eat meat and liver. These animal-based forms of iron absorb the best, hands down, because they don't have that 50 to 70% reduction from fiber on top of the problems from phytic acid in plants and polyphenols further blocking the iron. From a textbook within the National Library of Medicine 2024, they say non-heme iron found in plant sources has about 2/3 the bioavailability of heme iron, or iron found in animal products. And there's no debate about this that I've seen, by the way. On top of that, if you have low iron, fix your gut issues, because gut inflammation lowers your ability to absorb all nutrients, including iron. And don't just run out and buy a ferrous iron supplement or even a bisglycinate iron supplement, because iron is extremely oxidative, and you don't want to supplement straight shavings of iron metal. It's damaging to your body due to the oxidative effects. It's the opposite of an antioxidant. So you might raise your iron with those supplements, but now you created a bigger problem for overall nutrient and vitamin absorption. Now you're even more deficient in everything due to more gut inflammation. In medical journals, they call this the iron conundrum, because 1 in 5 people with IBD, inflammatory bowel disease, they have anemia because they don't absorb iron, but the iron supplements, the iron therapy, actually further damages the gut. And they don't want to admit eating red meat is literally good for you. Except in rare cases, extremely rare cases like the alpha-gal syndrome, but that's where they have a conundrum. It's not a conundrum. Eat meat, raise You raise your cholesterol to nice high levels, and your hormones will also go up because they're made from cholesterol. And as a general rule, you can never supplement your way out of gut issues. I suggest doing a DNA consult with AJ Consulting Company if you really want to get to the bottom of your unique gut issues, because everyone has different genetic risks for this, and there's thousands of options, honestly. Anyway, I guess that covers bullet point number 5, how to get your iron up or down with supplements and foods, meaning take liver pills and eat meat, or donate blood. And as you can see, we could talk for hours about iron, especially because corrupt organizations like the World Health Organization need to be featured in these discussions. But hopefully I've made the topic of iron and ferritin clear for you, and hopefully it helps you in your health journey in some way. Thanks for watching today.